Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was released on the last Friday of December 2024. And at the time of this video, we're at the first week of its run in Japan. And it's doing very well. In fact, I would have to say that it is probably one of the best films of 2024. And why would that be? It's because of something I like to call the 3 C's of meeting the shadow self. What is that, you may ask? Well, I think it's a means for writers to fill their 3 act structure with experiences that are universal for all of us, no matter where we come from. Be it Japan, where I'm living today, or anywhere else in the world. And in this review of Sonic 3, we'll see how the film's structure illustrates the journey of meeting with our shadow self in a 3-act storytelling form. And what I hope in this review, what it will do is help offer some ideas that will help you with your writing or even organizing events in your own life, as it has helped with me in my own life. So, what are the 3 C's of meeting the shadow self? Before we get into it, I have to put in some references to help us with our exploration of Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Along with referring to the 3-act structure, we'll also refer to Michael Haig's 4 main story types. Those being, not in any particular order of importance: 1, the win story; 2, the stop story; 3, the escape story; and 4, the retrieve story. These are stories that make up the bulk of stories of Hollywood films. So let's get into it, shall we? So in Act 1 of Sonic the Hedgehog 3, we have the clash between Sonic and Shadow. And what happens in this first act is a competition between these 2 characters, and in universal terms, the competition between the self and the shadow self. In Sonic's story arc, his story starts off as a stop story. And what that means is that the protagonist's goal is to prevent something bad from happening. And in Sonic the Hedgehog 3, it's Shadow laying waste the streets of Tokyo, which would not be good for me because I'm living in Tokyo right now. And in Shadow's story arc, he starts off as an escape story. An escape story being to get away from a dangerous or undesirable situation. In escape stories, this type of story is common in horror and action films, where characters must escape from a villain, quote unquote, a monster, or a perilous environment. And in Sonic's stop story, this type of story often involves high stakes and a ticking clock. Examples include disaster movies where characters must stop a catastrophe, or thrillers where they need to prevent a crime or an attack. So as Sonic and Shadow clash, there's also hints of their emotional story arc, where Sonic's emotional story arc is to stop someone else from taking his top spot, and Shadow's emotional story arc is to escape the pain of losing someone he holds very dear to him, a character named Maria. And the way he chooses to escape this pain is to go on a path of revenge. So in this first act, is set up this clash between titans, so to speak, Sonic and Shadow. Who will eventually prevail? Let's go further into the story and go into the next step, Act 2. Act 2, in terms of the 3 C's of meeting the shadow self, I'd like to call the second act a crisis of identity, where a confusion builds up between the self and the shadow self. In Sonic's story arc, his start as a stop story, trying to prevent Shadow from his path of destruction, his story starts to become a retrieve story. And what is a retrieve story in terms of Michael Haig's 4 main story types? In a retrieve story, the protagonist must obtain something valuable and bring it back. This is often seen in heist movies, rescue missions, or quests where characters seek a treasure, a person, or crucial information. And in Sonic the Hedgehog 3, he retrieves a past relationship with his former foe, Robotnik, played by the genius Jim Carrey. But in a deeper sense, Sonic's retrieve story is to regain the emphasis of the 3 musketeers, so to speak, of Sonic's team, where they start off calling themselves Team Sonic. But in the second act, we start to see, hints of Sonic trying to regain the emphasis of team in that team name rather than Sonic. So Sonic chooses or makes the choice, a very difficult choice, that is of teaming up with someone who's not his friends, at least not at this point. Dr. Robotnik character, again played by the genius of Jim Carrey. And on the other side of the coin, we have Shadow, who is also going through his own retrieve story, where he wants to regain that loving sense of self that he had in his past life with only the character of Maria, the granddaughter of Robotnik's grandfather, also played by Jim Carrey. Let's see if I can remember the name. Ivo Robotnik, I believe it is. I might be wrong. I'll have to correct it later on in the video. But here, in Shadow's retrieve story, he reteams with Dr. Robotnik, whose only interest with Shadow really is to use his power and destroy everything and everyone responsible or not responsible for taking his granddaughter away, the girl Maria. So in this act, we have all these trials and tests between Shadow and Sonic, not just testing each other's abilities, but also testing their sense of identity. It's a wonderful second act. So in the third and final act of Sonic the Hedgehog 3, where we started off in Act 1 with a separate self, going through all the trials and tests in Act 2, the crisis of identity, and then finally testing out all the lessons that both characters, Sonic and Shadow, have learned throughout the journey thus far, and see if they can transform their separate self into a synthesized self. And now, moving from Act 1, Sonic, his stop story, Shadow, his escape story, Act 2, they both going through their own retrieve story. In Act 3, they both cooperate, participate in a stop and escape story where the two stories were separate in Act 1. In Act 3, they are now together and shared by both characters, Sonic and Shadow. In terms of Sonic, his stop story involves stopping himself from going at it alone and actually working with his team and to escape his sense of self, this really inflated ego of being the fastest creature in the universe. And on the other side of the coin, Shadow, in his stop and escape story, he is finally able to let go of the pain that he had been feeling about his loss with his dear friend Maria. So his stop story concerns stopping himself from feeling the pain, and in terms of his escape story, escaping the destructive influence of Dr. Robotnik. And here we see both Sonic and Shadow becoming the super self and bring back balance into their respective worlds. It's a action-packed, wonderful story. It really is. So at the conclusion of Act 3, the cooperation between Sonic and Shadow, we enter into the denouement of the film, which is actually a fourth C. And this concerns something called centering. And a great metaphor for this idea of centering, which I don't know if it was intended in the written form of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 or if it was by accident. But the surrogate parents of Sonic being introduced in the film, going through their business plan of opening up a donut and muffin shop, and the father figure wearing this really obnoxious sweater, the donut lord across the sweater, and just all this puffy donuts. I mean, it's the center of the donut, that nothingness in a Zen Buddhist respect, is the goal of enlightenment, so to speak. I mean, I know in Western culture that might sound a bit too heavy, but trust me, it's something very important about knowing that at your core, like in Asian culture, the void that is formless, so you are able to have this fluid sense of self and adapt to situations. That emptiness is such an important, integral part of, I'll say, the Asian culture, but I do believe it's actually a universal theme that all cultures do share. And so what is this fourth C, centering? What we have is Shadow. Start off with Shadow, where he finally, he does realize that he has to let go of the pain of losing Maria. And this one line that resonated with Shadow when he and Maria were outside of the laboratories staring up into the night sky and all the stars glittering up above. He learns from Maria that the light still shines even after the star is gone. And Shadow is able to transform that pain he was feeling into something that can center him as he moves forward into future stories. In any case, we have Sonic in his denouement, in his centering. He is able to let go of his need to be at the top of everything. And when his friend, his teammate, Knuckles, also agrees to calling the team Team Sonic, Sonic replies, great line, just team. And so we have this wonderful journey between Sonic and his shadow self, appropriately named Shadow, in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. I think one of the best films of 2024 and in the 2020s. So to review the 3 C's of meeting the shadow self in terms of a kind of outline for your own stories in a 3-act structure. Act 1, the clash between the self and the shadow self. Act 2, the crisis of identity between both forms of the self. And Act 3, the cooperation of the self and the shadow self from a separate self and more of a synthesized self, which leaves both selves in, quote unquote, super form. And then as a bonus to kind of enter or to step forward into future stories, the 4th C, the centering, that finding the core of our sense of not just self, but a fluid self, a balanced self. Sonic the Hedgehog 3, what a great surprise the film was. Please share your thoughts if you've seen the film. Please let me know in the comments down below. And in the meantime, thank you so much for reaching this far into the video. I wish you a productive day. Thanks for visiting the right table, and catch you in the next one.